They laughed at the black waitress like her scar was a joke, never knowing it was born in fire, not failure. Every shift, she swallowed their cruelty in silence, until Big Shaq walked in. One look at that scar and he froze. Then came the tip, and 4 words that shattered everything. I remember the fire. In that moment, the joke ended. And the truth, it finally stood up. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They laughed when she turned around, but none of them saw the tear that never fell. The early morning sunlight filtered through dusty window panes, painting long, quiet shadows across the worn linoleum floor. In this small southern town, before the world had properly stirred awake, the diner sat in a faded haze of nostalgia. Chrome stools, red vinyl booths cracked like old smiles, and the ever-present hum of the grill. Inside, Delaney Ray moved with practiced ease, her apron hugging the curve of her waist, the fabric stained with splashes of coffee, grease, and thyme. She shuffled between tables, her steps measured, her eyes steady, until she reached the counter. They called this place Maples. That was the name on the weathered sign. But for Delaney it was less a diner and more a stage. Every day she watched, listened, endured. The regulars, white families and blue-collar old-timers showed up early, shoving cheap praise and heavy judgment in the same breath. A nod could come with a sneer, and a thank you might hide a whisper. She had learned to smile politely, hold her head high, not let her eyes betray the wariness she felt. Her scar, long and pale against her dark skin, ran from temple to jawline, a silent testament to a moment that had fashionably transformed her life, but broken something precious. The scar was her secret, her shame, and the thing everyone stared at when she served them. Extra toast. Light on the gravy. You want cream or sugar? Yes, ma'am. Her voice barely rose above a murmur, but it carried enough dignity to keep the entire kitchen humming. Her manager Dale, a big man with gray hair and a receding temper, rarely spoke to her. He'd hired her because she needed a job, nothing more. She saw it in the way he avoided her eyes, how he referred to her as the new girl, even after 2 years. Between the clatter of dishes, she let her thoughts drift back, like smoke in an empty room. Before the scar, before the diner, there had been a blaze, flames that roared through her past, took more than her sense of safety. She remembered the red glow in the doorway, the little girl's hand in hers, as they fled the heat. But just as she crossed the threshold to safety, the world shifted. Suddenly, cameras flashed, but not as celebration. Instead, questions were harsh. How dare a black woman cross boundaries? How dare she shine? She was the heroine who became the culprit in that town's narrative. At first, she tried to explain, but every word twisted into rumor. Now, she lived in the diner's quiet protests every morning. Nothing changed. She wiped tables, carried trays, refilled coffee mugs, all while enduring the incessant conversation about her. Some whispered she'd been drunk, others speculated about worse things. One lonely afternoon, a woman asked, "So, miss, what happened to your face?" Delaney paused. The woman sat on a stool, primed to gape. She turned, her scar arresting the woman's polite posture. Laughter tumbled from the woman's lips, faint at first, then longer. She didn't wait for an answer. She tucked her lips and left a quarter in exchange for a cold coffee. The noise of the diner swallowed the moment, but it etched itself into Delaney's chest. That night, leaving the diner after closing, she stood in the empty parking lot, the acrid stench of fryers in her lungs. She pulled her jacket tight and bypassed the slow drip of an ice cream sign buzzing in neon. She let the breeze tug at her skirt, cold against her skin. She closed her eyes and imagined a life far away, where a scar was a story, not a brand. But tomorrow would come, and with it, another shift full of silent whispers and sideways glances. She awoke before dawn slipped into her bedroom window, a worn yellow light against peeling wallpaper. She packed scraps of chicken and collard greens into a brown paper bag, laced up her sneakers, and left. No goodbyes, no reflections, just the familiar dread that today would be another test she couldn't lose. On her drive, the roads were hushed. Storefronts were shuttered. A single street lamp illuminated the peeling awning above the diner entrance, flickering once, then steady. One latte-colored minivan pulled up, engine humming. Out stepped 3 men whose voices seemed the same from their sweatshirts. All laughed like they had somewhere else to be. They looked at her scar, and she felt her heart squeeze. She plastered a polite smile on her face, opened the door and stepped onto the linoleum once more. Bell over the door jingled gently. The first regular at table 9 glanced at her, smirked, and said something to the others. They laughed low, but she heard it keenly. She approached with a tray of hash browns and bacon. The man with a toupee startled as he looked at her, his face betraying amusement and just a hint of panic, as if he feared she was there to call him out. She cleared her throat. "Here you go. Nice scar, sweetheart." His tone was casual, harmless. He believed. She forced steadiness into her hands. "That'll be You sure about that? Or you charge more for looks?" he joked. The others chuckled. She remembered the words that always followed. "Where'd you get it, child?" She chuckled politely. The manager sat nearby, pretending to read a paper in silence. Restless but unmoved. She leaned forward. "Excuse me, sir." Calm, direct. "I do apologize. But if you'd like to discuss me, perhaps you should talk to my face directly." The diner went quiet. The men looked confused, as if it was new that their cruelty could be met with dignity. The manager stiffened, hurriedly calling orders. Delaney whisked away, her heart pounding. She fixed up the rest of the tables, her breath rushing to settle her nerves. Between customers, she sank onto a stool at the counter. She stared at her reflection in the glass partition that separated the cooking area. The scar looked back at her, white against brown, raw as a hidden poem. She ran her fingers over it, tracing its lives. The blame, the shame, the quiet resilience. It was nearly noon when Mr. Harlan came in. He sat in his usual booth, near the window, right where the sunlight hit the floor just right. She brought him a cup of black coffee, and refilled it before his hands settled into old leather gloves. He smiled at her, a familiar but somber curve to his lips. "Morning, Delaney," he said in a quiet voice. "How's the world today?" She shook her head, a wisp of hair escaping her bun. "Same old." He glanced at her scar, then at her face, then back to the window. "You know, every mark has meaning. Yours speaks volumes." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, afraid of where this might lead. "I don't like talking about it." He nodded. "That's fine, but don't ever let others silence what you know. You were brave once. Don't let them rewrite that story." "Thank you, Mr. Harlan." He slid a folded piece of paper onto the table before standing. "Just something to remember," he said quietly. He paid his bill and left. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, revealing a simple message in neat handwriting. "Consider your own reflection before you judge others." She pressed it to her chest. The afternoon hours passed in monotony. Coffee cups cloned conversations, silent reverie. She kept replaying the paper's words, biting her lip, contemplating what it meant for her present. Was she still meek, still folding herself to the town's cruelty? Dale called her to the back office during a lull. She stepped inside, the fluorescent light glaring. He folded his hands on the desk, eyes fixed on hers, or was it the scar? "You had a scene earlier," Dale said, voice low. "Look, I don't want trouble. You know the rules. Keep it together." "I am," she answered quietly. "All I did was ask him to talk to me directly." He sighed. "Customers, you can't anger them. Not here." Her eyes flashed, but she swallowed it. "I'll be careful." He nodded, possibly relieved. He handed her a dish towel. Back to work. Closing time approached. The diner lighting dimmed. She wiped counters, cleaned stools, extracted herself from a gathering at table 9, laughter echoing through her head. She kept her back to them as she moved. She boxed up leftovers, set chairs on tables, pulled her hair into a low ponytail. The only sound was the soft sliding of metal on wood. Outside, the evening had swallowed the town. The sky bled orange and purple. She stepped through the door, inhaled the cool air, and paused to collect herself. She looked down at the crumpled paper from Mr. Harlan, in her pocket. Someone knocked on the door. She turned. No one was there, just a black envelope taped to the glass. She picked it up and tore it open. "Tomorrow be ready to be seen." Her heart raced. She looked back at the silent diner and whispered, "I'm not invisible." The night found her at home, in a sparsely furnished apartment, above a laundromat. She lit a single lamp and laid the envelope and the paper from Mr. Harlan on the table. She traced the words again, letting their encouragement settle into her bones. She wrote in her journal, a habit she'd kept since high school. But tonight the words were different. "I was brave before. I will be brave again." Through the window, distant car horns, stray headlights drifting by on empty streets. She closed her journal and stood, glancing at the cracked wall, imagining the scar on her own reflection. Not a flaw but a reminder. She lay back in bed, exhausted yet restless. Sleep came reluctantly, her heart planted firmly in tomorrow's promise. Morning arrived with a crisp determination. She dressed in a slightly sharper uniform, her blouse ironed clean, and her apron tied neatly. The scar remained unchanged. But something in her stance had shifted. She tied her hair tight, blinked firmly in the mirror, and whispered, "Today they will notice more than my scar." At the diner doorway, she paused. The bell jingled. Table 9 looked up at her. The women at the next booth whispered again. She sighed inwardly. But today she would not just serve. Today she would own the room. She began her shift with a crisp efficiency that turned heads. Her voice was just as soft, no harsher than usual. But her eyes held steel. As she took orders, refilled drinks, and answered idle questions, she felt something settling in her chest, not pride but clarity. When the toupee man looked her up and down with that lingering smirk, she held her gaze. When Reese's mouth opened, maybe to make another joke, she walked away without a flinch. The whole diner felt like a live wire charged, expectant. She could sense the tension, hear it in the way voices paused. During a lull, Dale approached, clearing his throat. Her pulse quickened, but he only whispered, "Might want to stay sharp." His tone was ambiguous, warning or admiration. She nodded. Then he left. She returned to the counter and watched as Mr. Harlan entered again, slow but steady in his stride. She handed him coffee, and for the first time they both acknowledged what simmered in her chest. Today the scar was more than a mark. It was a banner she was ready to bear. And as the morning progressed, she realized she wouldn't wait for someone else to notice her worth. She would announce it herself. By the time the lunch rush hit, the diner was full. Voices melded into a chorus of hunger, indifference, small-town gossip. She threaded through crowds, delivering plates with precision. She noticed the smirks fading. She felt their curiosity grow. Why was she different today? She reached table 9 at last. The toupee man stared, unsettled by a waitress who refused to shrink. She placed the burgers and golden fries before them without a word. Then she looked at them squarely. "Enjoy your meal. No apology, no softness. A gentle firmness as sure as a dawn." They glanced at each other. The toupee man cleared his throat. "Thanks," he muttered. She allowed a small nod, but didn't linger. As she stepped away, a hush fell across the diner. Forks paused midair. The silence felt electric, like a shared realization. They had been part of the narrative that diminished her. And for half a moment, they looked at her without their habitual filters. She retreated to the back, grabbed a glass, filled it with water, and took a long sip. The taste was cool and steady. She could taste her own resilience in it now. This was just the beginning. The noon sun warmed the parking lot outside. Patrons filed out. Delaney watched them go, silent and resolute. Her scar glinted in the light, not via shame anymore, but as the visible line of a story still unfolding. She tightened her apron, one last time. Tomorrow she'd write another chapter, and maybe, just maybe, this faded diner could be the canvas of real change. Starting with one waitress believing in herself. All because for the first time, she wasn't the background. She was the story. When the shift ended, she walked out into the afternoon air. Each step lighter than the one before. She tucked the envelope from earlier into her pocket. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to, because today, she carried something stronger. Her own eyes, seeing not a stain on her apron, but a banner in her heart. Sometimes cruelty doesn't come with fists. Sometimes, it's dressed in khakis and a smirk. There was something about table 9 tucked just close enough to the window for sunlight to hit their designer sunglasses, but just far enough from the counter that Delaney couldn't always hear what they said. But she didn't need to. The tone was always the same. Smug, laced with sarcasm, dipped in that syrupy southern charm that could sound polite while cutting skin deep. They were always loud enough when they wanted to be heard, and she knew, every time she walked by with a pot of fresh coffee or a tray of scrambled eggs, that their laughter wasn't as harmless as the others thought. The ringleader of the daily circus was Reese Calloway, the kind of man who had inherited his seat at the table before he learned to earn his own. His father owned the lumberyard and 3 other buildings downtown, and his grandfather's name was still etched on a plaque in the courthouse. Reese had been prom king, ran track, married the mayor's niece, and never lost his entitlement. He always wore khaki slacks, polished loafers, and an expression that hovered somewhere between amusement and condescension. Delaney had seen his type before, but Reese had the town in his back pocket, and that made him dangerous in a different way. The others who sat with him, Bryce, Hunter, and occasionally a man named Todd, were less sharp in word, but just as sharp in laughter. They drank black coffee, ordered too many refills, never tipped more than $1, and had a special talent for pretending not to know how insulting they were being. They said things just loud enough. She's got that storm scar. You know, real tragic. Must have been some fire to burn her pretty off, Reese once said while stirring cream into his coffee with a plastic knife. Wonder what else she burns up, Bryce snorted. Just don't let her near the napkins. Might ignite, added Hunter. The whole table roared. Delaney, 2 booths away, kept pouring syrup for an old couple who pretended not to notice the exchange. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. But inside, something cinched tight. When she brought their next round of refills, Reese greeted her with a wide smile. Morning, sunshine. How's the fire in you today? She kept her voice measured, her hands steady. Here's your coffee. He leaned back in his chair, arms stretched wide. You know, they say a scar tells a story. Yours must be a whole novel. The others chuckled again, not looking at her, never direct. Delaney offered a half smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Then I guess you'll have to read carefully. Hunter raised an eyebrow at her tone, but said nothing. Reese, to her surprise, didn't react right away, just stared. Something about her response unsettled him, but only momentarily. She turned before they could gather momentum again, walked away slowly, deliberately, but the air around her crackled with silent humiliation. She passed Dale near the kitchen door. He looked up from his clipboard, saw the tightness in her shoulders, and then looked back down, saying nothing. That was Dale's gift. Strategic invisibility. He managed to be present without ever being present. When customers were happy, he surfaced. When tension brewed, he melted into walls. He told the staff the same thing during the morning meeting every day. Keep it simple, smile, and don't stir. For him, silence was safe. Complaints were bad for business. Conflict was worse. Delaney once asked him, when he first hired her, if the town was friendly. He'd laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, they'll smile right at you, and pray your knees break when you leave the room. She hadn't known then how real that warning was. In the back kitchen, she leaned against the fridge door for a moment, closing her eyes. The sting wasn't from the words. It was from the familiarity. This wasn't new. This was the 100th paper cut, in the same spot. She imagined walking out, grabbing her keys, never coming back. But where would she go? What town didn't have a table 9? At the prep station, Marnie, one of the other waitresses, was slicing tomatoes. Marnie was black too, but older, rough around the edges, and perfectly content keeping her head down. She glanced up once. Table 9 again. Delaney didn't answer. She didn't need to. Marnie went back to slicing. You either grow thicker skin, baby girl, or you stop listening. Delaney didn't want thicker skin. She wanted fairness. She wanted someone, anyone, to say it was wrong. But in Maple's diner, silence was currency, and everyone traded in it. Back on the floor, she continued moving through the motions. A tray here, a receipt there, a refill for the woman with 3 kids, a smile for the old man who always asked for extra jelly. Every time she crossed paths with table 9, the tension rose. Reese would mutter something, and the rest would break into restrained laughter. Today it was about her voice. That soft little whisper. You talk like you're scared of your own thoughts. Another jab. Another moment. Swallow. The other black employee in the kitchen, Andre, a busboy in his early 20s, worked behind the scenes, cleaning tables, stacking dishes, humming softly to himself. He wore headphones half the time. When Delaney brushed past him, he nodded but said nothing. He never got involved. Not his job. Not his business. Near closing, she took a short break by the back door, breathing in the thick air. Her phone buzzed. A text from her cousin upstate. You still thinking about coming here? That job at the rec center is still open. She stared at the message for a long while, thumb hovering. Her heart surged at the thought. She could leave, start fresh, where nobody knew her name, her scar, her past. But then she remembered Mr. Harlan's words, written in that old note. Wait for the right eyes. What if she ran just before they arrived? She stepped back inside and returned to work. At table 9, Reese was gathering his things. He'd written something on the receipt. Delaney approached cautiously, picked it up. Next to the total, he'd scrawled a message. Smile more. You're prettier when you forget you're mad. The tip was 50 cents. She stared at the words. Not angry. Not hurt. Just hollow. She crumpled the paper, walked back to the register, and slid the coins into the tip jar without a word. Dale passed her, glancing at the jar. Slow dead? She looked him dead in the eye. Something like that. He paused as if wanting to say more, but then he just nodded, disappearing into the office again. When the shift ended, she gathered her things in silence. As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the window. The scar, her eyes, the straight line of her mouth, the laughter from table 9 still rang faintly in her ears, like smoke that clung to her clothes long after a fire. But she didn't break. She wouldn't give them that. Not yet. Outside, the sky was turning purple, twilight wrapping the street in a bruised light. She walked past the parking lot, her steps slow but sure. She didn't know yet what would happen tomorrow, but she knew this much. Table 9 might laugh loudest, but they weren't laughing last. Not for long. He came in quietly, just once every few months, but he always left more than money. The first time Delaney Ray saw him, it was late winter. The diner windows were fogged with condensation, the air inside thick with the scent of burnt toast and bacon grease. It had been a hard morning. Table 9 had arrived with extra venom in their laughter, and Dale had already snapped at her twice for things that weren't her fault. She'd just cleared a table near the back when the bell over the door jingled, and in walked a man who didn't belong. He wore a dark wool coat buttoned high and a fedora that had seen better days. His gait was slow but deliberate, like he was taking inventory of the air. He didn't look around as if searching for someone. Instead, he moved straight to the last booth near the window, where the sunlight struggled to break through the grime, and sat down with a quiet exhale, as though the seat remembered him. His skin was deep brown, his face carved with lines that suggested he'd seen too much, said too little, and walked further than most ever would. He looked like a relic from another era, a ghost in a place that didn't know how to honor memory. Delaney approached with cautious professionalism. Can I get you something to drink, sir? He glanced up, his eyes sharp but kind, flicking briefly to the scar on her face before settling on her gaze. Water. No lemon. And coffee. Black. She nodded and turned, but something in his eyes followed her, something searching. She returned with his drinks, setting them down gently. He folded his hands on the table like a preacher about to deliver a sermon and said, "You keep waiting for the right eyes." She paused, uncertain. "Excuse me?" He smiled faintly. "You'll know when they show up." She blinked, unsure whether to respond or just move on. Before she could decide, he reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, and tucked it under the edge of the coffee cup. Then he looked out the window, as if that was the end of it. He didn't order food. He stayed exactly 23 minutes, finishing half the coffee, then stood, nodded once at her, and left without another word. It became a pattern. Every few months the man returned, always in that coat, always at the same booth, always with the same request. Sometimes he stayed longer, sometimes shorter. He rarely said more than a sentence or two, but every time, he left a generous tip, $20, $30 on a coffee. Once he left a crisp $100 bill folded into the napkin dispenser. He never gave his name. Dale referred to him as that old drifter, rolled his eyes and mumbled something about senile churchfolk. But Delaney felt something different. There was something deliberate about him. He looked at her as if he knew her, not from town, not from gossip, but from somewhere deeper, quieter, like he could see the moment in her life she stopped believing the world could be fair, like he recognized the weight she carried, and approved of how she hadn't let it sink her. Once, after a particularly cruel shift where Reese had mimed choking on his food when she walked past, Mr. Harlan, she'd heard another waitress whisper his name once, leaned forward just slightly, and said, "Sometimes you don't have to raise your voice to be loud." That day he left a folded envelope with her name on it, handwritten. Inside was a quote clipped from a newspaper article. "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." Frederick Douglass. She didn't tell anyone. She kept the envelope in the back of her journal, and reread it whenever the days became too long. That was the week she started writing again, capturing his visits, recording his words, trying to piece together what his presence meant. She began labeling the entries H, writing like she was documenting some invisible thread only she could see. Sometimes she asked herself if he was real. No one else in the diner seemed to take much notice. Marnie would give a slight nod. Andre barely registered his existence. Even Dale treated him like background noise. And yet every time he entered, Delaney felt the diner shift slightly on its axis, like time slowed, like something meaningful had just been set in motion. She once asked him why he kept coming back. He sipped his coffee and replied, "Because light finds what's been buried. You can only see stars in darkness, child." It wasn't a real answer, but it was the only kind he gave. One afternoon, he came in while the lunch rush was winding down. Delaney had just finished clearing a booth littered with ketchup packets and crumpled napkins. She wiped her hands and approached his table. "Rough day?" he asked before she even spoke. She nodded, too tired to lie. "It's always rough." He tilted his head. "No, you just haven't had a different yet." She sat across from him, just for a minute. No one noticed or cared. "Why do you talk to me like you know something I don't?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because I've seen scars turn into bridges. Yours? That one's got destiny written all over it." She blinked. "I don't know what you mean." "You will." He stood, dropping a 50 on the table. "Just keep watching. They'll come. And when they do, don't look away." That night she wrote for 2 hours straight. She wrote about the way the diner lights reflected in his eyes, about how his words echoed even when the place emptied out. She drew a sketch of the booth where he always sat, wrote down the things he said as if they were scripture. She didn't know why it mattered so much, but it did. He felt like a puzzle piece to something bigger, something she hadn't even seen the edges of yet. The town, of course, said otherwise. When she once mentioned him to a few regulars, they laughed. "Old Harlan? He's harmless." Little touched in the head. He used to be someone back in the 60s. Think he ran a church, or maybe a liquor store. Who knows? Everyone had a different story. No one had the full truth. But Delaney believed in his presence. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was intentional. And somehow it was connected to her. The journal became her sanctuary. On nights when the silence of her apartment pressed in too close, she'd light a candle, open the worn pages, and reread every word he'd spoken. She began documenting the things no one else saw. The way Reese always adjusted his watch right before insulting her. The flicker of guilt that flashed through Dale's eyes on slow days. The kindness in strangers, who never knew her name. She was training herself to see, to wait. As Harlan had instructed, she still didn't know what the right eyes meant. But she trusted it now. Trusted him. Trusted that something was coming. And when it did, she would be ready. The last time he visited, he stayed longer than usual. The diner was nearly empty, and he waved her over to sit. "I won't be back for a while," he said, voice heavy with meaning. Delaney's heart tightened. "Why?" "Because the story's about to turn. And when it does, your voice will be needed more than mine." She swallowed. "You make it sound like I matter." He looked at her then, really looked. "You matter so much they tried to bury you before you could bloom. But you're still standing. Still smiling. That's what scares them." He left her with another envelope. Inside was a photograph. A young girl, maybe 6, standing in front of a house that looked like it had been pulled from a fire. The girl held a teddy bear. Her eyes wide, frightened, and familiar, stared straight into the lens. Delaney flipped it over. No name, no date, just a note in Harlan's careful script. "You saved someone. Don't forget." Her hand trembled. She pressed the photo into her journal and shut it gently, as if closing a sacred text. Her heart pounded in her ears. Questions surged. But she wouldn't rush. Not now. Harlan had warned her. She had to be patient. Had to trust. She tucked the journal under her pillow that night, and didn't sleep much. Outside, the wind howled against the thin walls of her apartment. But she wasn't afraid. Something had shifted. She could feel it. The ghost who tipped well wasn't a ghost at all. He was the first real sign that the fire hadn't taken everything. When the fire started, she saved someone who never said thank you. But the scar stayed. The memory didn't haunt her like a ghost. It lived in her like an echo. It waited in the moments between shifts, in the hush before dawn, in the silence of smoke-scented dreams. She had tried to push it down, bury it beneath the rhythm of diner plates, and the quiet ache in her bones. But it never stayed buried. Because trauma doesn't vanish. It lingers. It reminds. And some nights when she closed her eyes, she could still hear the crackle of burning wood, and the scream no one else acknowledged. 3 years earlier, on a cold October night, Delaney Ray had stood in the middle of the street, barefoot and breathless, staring at the blaze engulfing the Cooper residence. The fire was vicious, violent, greedy, the air was thick with smoke and ash, and the sirens hadn't yet arrived. Most people screamed and scattered. Delaney moved forward. She hadn't known them well. The Coopers were an upper-middle-class white family, polite in passing but reserved, cloaked in the invisible walls that split the town. Their daughter, Charlotte, was 6 years old, with honey-blonde hair and a shy smile. Delaney had seen her once at a community barbecue, standing apart while her mother made small talk with churchwomen. That night, Delaney had been walking home from her part-time library job, cutting through back streets, when she noticed the flicker, orange and hot against the dark. She ran before she thought. The front door was partially open, the hallway choked with smoke. Inside, she heard it, a thin, terrified cry. Without hesitation, she bolted in. She wrapped her arms in her jacket and covered her mouth with a sleeve. Flames licked up the staircase as the floor groaned under her weight. At the top of the stairs, Charlotte's bedroom door was closed. Delaney pushed through, coughing, heart pounding. The child was curled in a corner, clutching a singed stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with terror. Delaney didn't speak. She just scooped the girl into her arms and turned back through the smoke. She took a different path down the back stairs, but a beam collapsed as they passed. It caught her across the face, a burst of pain and heat so sudden it nearly dropped her to her knees. But she held on, kept moving, got the girl out. By the time she emerged, the firefighters had arrived. Neighbors circled, phones out, gasping, whispering. One of them tried to grab Charlotte. Delaney passed her over without a word. Her hands were shaking, face burning, vision blurred from ash and pain. She sat down on the sidewalk and pressed her palms into the concrete, just to feel something solid. No one asked her if she was hurt. No one offered her a blanket. The paramedics surrounded the Coopers. Delaney faded into the background like a smudge on a photo, visible but unacknowledged. The next morning, the local paper ran a front-page story. Tragedy narrowly avoided in residential blaze. Young girl rescued. The headline didn't mention Delaney Ray. The article said the cause of the fire was unknown. But neighbors, it claimed, had reported seeing a young woman entering the home moments before the fire began. The implication was clear. Whispers followed. By that afternoon, the narrative had shifted from heroism to recklessness. An anonymous tip, most likely one of Reese's people, Delaney suspected, told police Delaney had once protested a local housing policy, that she had a history of outspoken behavior, that she had been near the Cooper property too often, that maybe she wanted to make a statement. It spiraled fast. No charges were ever filed. But the damage was done. Delaney was labeled a fire starter by some, a liar by others. Charlotte's family never released a statement, never reached out, never told the truth. Delaney lost her job at the library within a week. Her face split by a healing wound, the skin jagged and raw, became another symbol, not of bravery, but of suspicion. She remembered sitting in her mother's kitchen, staring at the scar forming in the mirror. Her mother, Lucille, wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "They'll never give you credit, baby, but don't you dare give them your soul." But the soul weathers. It hardens. Especially when the people you risk your life for pretend you never existed. Delaney moved out of her mother's house a month later. She took a waitressing job 2 counties over, then another, and finally, she landed at Maple's Diner, where no one mentioned the fire, at least not directly. But some recognized her face. Some remembered enough to sneer. She learned to keep her story quiet. Let others fill the silence with assumptions. She stopped correcting them. Let the scar do the talking. But it never healed properly. And that was the part no one saw. They didn't see the hours spent tracing the scar in the mirror, wondering if she should have taken the front stairs. They didn't see the nights she woke choking on phantom smoke. They didn't see the way she flinched whenever someone asked about her past. She journaled it, though. All of it. The fire, the fallout, the betrayal. Mr. Harlan had asked her once, "What would you do if someone handed you the truth back?" She hadn't answered then. She didn't. But now, that question lingered. What would she do? Because deep down she didn't want revenge. She wanted restoration. She wanted someone, anyone, to stand up and say she saved that girl. She mattered. She wanted it to be Charlotte. But the girl was gone now. relocated with her family. Last she heard, they'd moved out of state. No forwarding address. No contact. Just smoke left behind. That night, the anniversary of the fire, Delaney sat on the floor of her apartment. A candle lit in the dark, the journal open in her lap. She reread the entry she'd written hours after the fire, still high on adrenaline and disbelief. She was small, light as feathers. I remember how tightly she held on. I didn't think, I just moved. And then the beam fell, and I remember thinking, if this is it, I'm okay. At least she'll live. She closed the journal slowly. Then she whispered to the room, I'd still do it again. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. The scar wasn't a punishment. It was a receipt for something no one else had the courage to pay for. And one day she promised herself, the world would see it that way. His shoulders filled the booth like a statue made of memory. It was just after the lunch crowd had thinned out, the dull hum of conversation giving way to the quiet shuffle of forks and the soft chime of the kitchen bell. Delaney Ray was wiping down a table near the window, eyes low, mind elsewhere, when the door opened and something shifted. She didn't look right away. The bell rang like it always did, but the energy changed. Not loud, not chaotic, just weighty, the kind of presence that bent the room around it. She turned instinctively, and there he was, tall, broad, impossible to ignore, though he made no effort to be seen. He ducked slightly to step through the doorway, the top of his head nearly brushing the frame. His build was unmistakable, like someone carved from purpose and held together by gravity itself. A gray hoodie draped over his massive frame, and a simple pair of jeans hung comfortably, clean but unpretentious. He wore dark aviator sunglasses, even indoors, which made his stillness somehow more intense. He didn't speak, just moved to the booth in the far corner, one usually left empty, unless the other seats were full. The corner where light rarely reached, where quiet clung like cobwebs. He sat, still, silent.
Delaney watched him for a moment. Something about his size, his presence, it tickled the edge of her memory, like a song half remembered from childhood. Then Dale breezed past her, arms full of receipts, muttering, "Don't stare, treat him like everyone else."
Except he wasn't everyone else. She approached cautiously, order pad in hand. "Afternoon, can I get you something?" He tilted his head up slowly. Behind the glasses, his eyes were unreadable. He didn't answer. She waited. Then he said, voice low and patient, "I'm good for now. Just watching." Delaney hesitated. "All right. Let me know if you change your mind." He nodded once. And that was it. She left the booth, glancing over her shoulder once. He sat unmoving, hands resting on the table, fingers interlaced. Not bored, not anxious. Just present. Intentional. She checked on the other tables, poured coffee, cleared plates, but kept finding her gaze drawn back to the corner. The other staff seemed to avoid looking at him directly. Dale kept pacing from the kitchen to his office, pretending not to notice the magnetic pull of their new guest. Even Reese, who had dropped by earlier and made some offhand comment about giants taking up space, had paused mid-sentence when he noticed the booth and for once didn't press for attention. Time passed. The man didn't order, didn't leave. He just sat, watching Delaney most of all. The afternoon stretched toward evening. The shadows outside lengthened, and still he didn't move. At one point, a small group of teenagers walked in and stopped short when they noticed him. One of them whispered something, pulled out a phone. The man turned slightly, just enough, and the teen froze, lowered the phone, and backed off. No confrontation, just presence. Delaney brought him water. He accepted it with a nod, still said nothing. Near closing, she began to feel it in her chest, the thrum of curiosity turning into tension. Was he watching her? And if so, why? She wiped down the counter, heart beating faster. As the last customers left and Andre flipped the closed sign, Delaney looked toward the corner booth, and it was empty. Her chest tightened. She hadn't seen him leave. She walked over, cautious. On the table sat a plain envelope. No name, no address. Just wait. She opened it carefully. Inside, 10 crisp $100 bills. And a folded note. 4 words printed in neat, bold handwriting. "I remember the fire." Delaney stared at it for a long time. She sat down, still holding the note. The words throbbed on the page like a heartbeat. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't charity. This was recognition. And whoever he was, he knew. She took the envelope and slipped it into her apron. Dale was locking up, too busy counting receipts to notice her pale expression. Marnie had already left. Andre waved, earbuds in, oblivious. Delaney walked out into the night with her heart hammering, the note burning in her pocket. The air was cool and still. No wind, no sound, just the echo of the booth, in her mind. The shadow of the man who had seen her, really seen her, and left without asking for anything in return. At home, she placed the envelope on the table next to her journal. She stared at the bills, untouched, and the note. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "Today, a man I don't know watched me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for a long time. He left $1,000 in 4 words. He knows. Somehow he knows. And I don't feel afraid. I feel seen." She didn't sleep much that night. Her thoughts raced, cycling through questions. Who was he? Why now? How did he know? And more than anything, what was she supposed to do next? The next morning, she showed up to the diner early. The envelope still tucked safely inside her coat. She didn't tell anyone. Not Marnie, not Dale, not even Mr. Harlan. When he showed up for coffee mid-morning and glanced at her with knowing eyes. But she was changed. Lighter. Sharper. Her back a little straighter. Her voice a little firmer. At lunch, Reese came in again, laughing with his crew. Delaney didn't flinch. Didn't brace. She poured his coffee without looking at him and said calmly, "Careful. Might be a giant listening." Reese paused, blinked at her. "What?" She smiled. "Never mind." And, for once, he didn't have a comeback. She returned to the counter and found herself looking toward the corner booth. Empty now. But not forgotten. It had become something else. A beacon. A promise. And deep in her bones, Delaney knew that man wasn't done. Not with her. Not with this story. Secrets have sharp teeth, and someone heard the note wasn't all she got. It didn't take long for the wrong eyes to find the envelope. Delaney thought she'd been discreet, tucking the note and cash into her apron, slipping out into the dark like she always did. But Maple's diner, for all its cracked booths and yellow lighting, had eyes in every corner, and gossip didn't need a stage. It just needed a whisper. The next morning she arrived to find the air already electric. The coffee pots were full, the grills were hot, and something unspoken hung between the swinging kitchen doors and the checkout counter like smoke. Marnie barely looked up when Delaney passed. Andre gave her a chin nod, earbuds in. Dale didn't speak, but she could feel it. Something had shifted. And then came Jenna. Jenna Walker, Reese's girlfriend, was not known for her silence. Blonde, athletic, with the practiced posture of someone raised on Sunday services and baton twirls, she could weaponize a whisper better than most used fists. She wasn't a regular, but when she came in it was always a performance. Air kisses to Dale, double takes at Delaney's scar, loud phone calls about influencer partnerships. That morning she waltzed in alone. Sunglasses perched high, phone pressed to her ear. Delaney noticed her too late. She was at the register checking the receipt tape when Jenna froze mid-step. Her head tilted. Her eyes narrowed. It was the envelope. Delaney hadn't realized it was still sticking out from her coat pocket. The edge visible. A sliver of bold black ink peeking through. And Jenna saw it. She didn't say anything then. Just smiled slowly. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach her teeth. She placed an order, took a booth near the back, and spent the next 20 minutes scrolling her phone without eating. Delaney knew better than to ignore instincts. Something was brewing. By the end of the lunch shift, the whispers started. First from Marnie, muttering as she cleaned the soda machine, "You take tips in envelopes now. Not cruel, not kind, just noted." Then from Andre, who paused while stacking trays. "Donna been in here twice today. That ever happened before?" Delaney tried to stay composed. "No, it hasn't." He nodded, slowly. "Guess it's gonna be one of those weeks." The next morning, Dale called her into the office. His tone was clipped, and he didn't make eye contact as she stepped inside. The office smelled like printer ink and stress. He motioned for her to sit, then shut the door. "Look," he started, leaning back in the chair like it hurt to sit up straight. "We've got a bit of chatter." Delaney kept her voice steady. "About what?" He exhaled. "About you. Some folks are saying you've got outside attention, media types, celebrities." She said nothing. He leaned forward. "Now I don't know what that note was, or who left it, but this isn't the kind of place that thrives on attention. We keep things simple. We don't stir up noise. You know what I'm saying." "Is that a warning?" He sighed again. It's an observation. No, Dale. It's a threat. He blinked, surprised by her tone. She stood, slow and deliberate. I haven't broken any rules. I haven't started any fights. If people have a problem with me receiving a note in silence, maybe you should be asking them why. Delaney. Don't worry. I'll keep doing my job. Like I always do. She left the office before he could finish his sentence. Outside, the wind carried the scent of coming rain. The alley behind the diner, the one she always cut through when leaving, suddenly felt like it was holding its breath. She stepped into it at dusk, the bricks on either side glowing faintly under the orange streetlight. That's when she heard the voice. You always walk out this way? She turned. Jenna, leaning against the wall, arms folded, smile sharp. Delaney said nothing. Jenna stepped closer. You know, for someone who plays invisible so well, you've sure made yourself noticeable lately. Is there something you need? I saw the note. Jenna's voice was sugary. I heard the whispers. And I know you didn't just get a thank you card. That man, he left you money, didn't he? Delaney's jaw tightened. Relax, Jenna continued. I'm not here to make a scene. Just curious. Because see, people like you don't usually attract people like him. Shaquille O'Neal? That was him, right? Delaney's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Jenna? Want to understand what he sees in you. Jenna's voice dropped slightly, her envy slipping through the mask. You serve pancakes and carry a sob story, and somehow that gets you a VIP ticket into relevance. Delaney stepped forward. You think relevance comes from being noticed. I think it comes from surviving what others couldn't. For a moment, Jenna's expression faltered. Then she smirked. Just don't let it get to your head. This town eats its martyrs. Delaney didn't respond. She walked past her, slow and sure, the alley behind her falling into silence. She didn't look back. A week passed. The tension didn't fade. It spread. The stares lingered longer. The laughs were shorter. Dale grew more clipped. Even Mr. Harlan watched her with a new stillness, like he was waiting for something to tip. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, he returned. Big Shaq. This time, there was no subtlety, no sunglasses. He wore a plain black sweater, jeans, and a presence that turned heads the moment the bell above the door rang. He didn't sit in the corner booth. He sat at the counter. Delaney saw him. Everyone saw him. The room hushed. She approached, heart thudding. Welcome back, she said. He nodded. I said I'd be back. She set down a coffee, unsure what to do with her hands. You remember the fire. I remember the lie more, he said calmly. Her throat tightened. You were the girl in the paper, he continued. I remember that photo. I was nearby that week. Everyone praised the parents. But I read between the lines. I saw what they didn't say. Delaney glanced around. Dale had frozen by the register. Marnie was peeking from behind the soda machine. Shaq leaned forward, voice still low. You pulled a child out of a burning house, got branded a threat because of your skin, and you stayed quiet. Why? Because no one would have listened. His eyes met hers. I'm listening now. She didn't speak. Couldn't. The lump in her throat was too real. He continued. I don't come here for attention. I came because you matter. You don't have to scream. You just have to stand. I'll do the rest. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then nodded. And for the first time in years, the scar on her face felt lighter. He placed a second envelope on the counter. Not full of money. This one had a business card. Next time someone questions you, he said, tell them they can talk to me. Then he stood and left. The diner remained silent for a full minute after he was gone. And then it erupted. Voices swelled. Marnie let out a low whistle. Dale's mouth opened and closed. But Delaney just smiled, walked to the register, and slid the envelope into her apron. This time, she didn't hide it. When a crowd gathers for cruelty, justice doesn't stand a chance, unless someone interrupts. The diner was louder than usual. It was a Saturday, the kind of day when people stayed longer after breakfast, lingering over second cups of coffee and the illusion of small-town peace. The booths were full, the counter lined with regulars, and the chatter bounced off the chrome and vinyl like static. Delaney Ray moved through it all like a current beneath the surface, present but muted, eyes down, movements precise. She had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Until the man at booth 3 opened his mouth. He was new. Not a regular. Not a local. A traveling insurance rep maybe. Or some small-time vendor in town for the weekend fair. Mid-40s, skin pale and expression smug. The kind of man who expected the world to orbit his comfort. He hadn't been difficult until now. Just impatient. Entitled. She approached with his check, smiling politely. "Here you go, sir. Let me know if you need anything else." He looked up slowly, squinting. "That's a hell of a scar," he said, like it was casual, like he was commenting on the weather. Delaney froze for a fraction of a second. "Yes, sir."
He didn't stop.
"You get that in some bar fight? Or maybe your boyfriend didn't like the way you looked at someone else." A chuckle, low and oily. "Bet it makes people nervous. Makes their eggs taste different." Her hands tightened around the receipt book. She glanced around the diner, but no one moved. Marnie looked away. Andre was in the back. Dale had conveniently disappeared again. The man leaned back in his booth. "Just saying, sweetheart. You wear a mark like that, you ought to expect people to ask." The air in the diner grew thick. A few customers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. Delaney set the check down gently. "Have a good day." As she turned, another voice cut through the tension. Not loud, but deliberate. "Did you ask her name first?" The diner stilled. Shaquille O'Neal was standing near the counter. Massive and still, his voice low but firm. He hadn't been there minutes ago. No one had noticed him enter. But now he was unmistakable. Broad-shouldered, towering, dressed in black, a presence impossible to ignore. The man at booth 3 frowned. "Excuse me?" Shaq took a step forward. "You asked her about her scar, but not her name. That says more about you than it does about her." A ripple moved through the diner. Forks clinked against plates. Conversations froze. Delaney stood frozen, hands trembling slightly. She wasn't used to this kind of defense. Not here. Not anywhere. Shaq's voice carried, calm and measured. "See, y'all don't know what that scar means. You think it's a wound, something to mock. But I know what it really is. That scar's a story. And it doesn't belong to shame. It belongs to courage." He walked to the center of the diner. Everyone was watching now. Eyes wide, breaths held. "A few years ago," he began, "there was a girl, black, young, lived in a town where she was always told to be quiet, always told to smile smaller. One night she saw a house on fire. Didn't wait for the fire trucks. Didn't wait for permission. She ran inside, through the flames, saved a child. Saved a child." Murmurs started. Shaq continued, steady as a drumbeat. "The news got twisted. Said maybe she caused it. Said maybe she was reckless. But I was there that week. I read those headlines. I saw the fear in their voices, the way they buried her name so they could protect their image." He turned toward the man at the booth. "You ever run into a burning house for someone else's kid?" The man didn't answer. Shaq pointed to Lainey. "She did." Gasps. Audible. The diner, once hostile in silence, was now stunned by truth. "She didn't ask for applause," Shaq went on. "Didn't ask for recognition. Just kept working, serving, smiling, and getting mocked by men like you who think cruelty is entertainment." Dale emerged from the back, face red. "All right, that's enough," he said, voice shaking. "We don't need speeches here." Shaq turned his head, slow and deliberate. "Do you know who she is, Dale?" Dale blinked. She's a waitress." "No." Shaq's voice dropped, grave and full. "She's a hero, and you've let this town treat her like a ghost." Delaney felt her throat tighten, eyes welled, but she didn't look down. Shaq wasn't finished. He addressed the whole room now. "You've all sat here, watch her carry your food, clean your spills, take your jokes. You laughed at her scar without knowing what it cost. You ignored her silence without wondering what it hid." He looked at Delaney then. "But I see you." The room pulsed with heat and stillness. No one dared move. Then, slowly, a woman near the window clapped. Once. Then again. A man at the counter joined, then another, until the diner echoed with slow, unsure applause. Hesitant, awkward, but real. Shaq nodded once and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he said one final thing. "Next time you see a scar, ask for the story before you make yourself the ending." Then he was gone. The diner stood still, suspended in his absence. Dale cleared his throat. "Back to work, folks." But no one moved. Delaney turned and walked slowly to the back. She entered the kitchen, leaning against the counter, her hands shaking. Andre followed a minute later. "You okay?" She nodded, unsure if it was true. "You want me to tell him off? That guy who said all that?" he asked. "No," she whispered. Someone already did. That night, as she closed out her shift, the man from booth 3 left without tipping. But he didn't say another word. And as Delaney wiped down the counter for the last time, she thought about Shaq's words, about how justice sometimes walks in quietly and doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it just reminds the room who you are. The one who could confirm the truth has been silent for years, until now. In the quiet hours before dawn, Delaney sat by her window, the sky outside smeared in shades of charcoal and ink. The town was still asleep, but inside her chest, something pulsed, urgent, anxious, electric. The diner's silence from yesterday still rang in her ears, not from humiliation this time, but from the moment it all changed. Shaq's voice, the slow applause, the crowd unsure of what to do with the truth, handed it to them in plain sight. Still, applause was not redemption, and recognition didn't erase history. She had lived under that scar for 3 years, and while Shaq had spoken for her, what she needed now, what she had never dared to ask for, was a witness. Someone who had been there. Someone who had nothing to gain. Someone who remembered the fire for what it truly was. The girl Delaney had dreamed about, her face. Charlotte. The way she clutched her teddy bear. The smell of her singed hair. Her arms wrapped tight around Delaney's neck. And then silence. The child had been scooped up by her parents, swallowed by the system of protection that people like Delaney were never offered. But Shaq, he had promised action. And Shaq did not make idle promises. He returned 2 days later, quiet as before. This time, he walked straight into the kitchen without a word, past a stunned Andre and a gaping Dale. Delaney was prepping the condiments for the lunch rush when he appeared in the doorway, all presence and patience. "I found her," he said. Delaney's breath caught. She turned fully. "You what?" "Charlotte. She's 12 now. Lives with her mother 2 towns over. They changed their name." Her knees almost gave. "She's okay?" "She's more than okay. But she remembers, and she's been waiting to talk to someone. She's just never been asked." Delaney blinked. Her mother? Protective. Nervous. But not malicious. She's afraid of the noise that might come from the truth. She doesn't want people digging into their lives. Delaney nodded slowly. That, she understood. The truth, once set free, had a way of tearing up roots. Shaq stepped closer. "I spoke to them. Charlotte wants to meet you." Delaney swallowed hard. "Now?" He reached into his coat and handed her a folded note. "Tomorrow. At the old library downtown. Closed Sundays. Quiet. Safe." Her hands trembled as she took it. She wanted to say thank you, but the words lodged somewhere between awe and disbelief. "You don't have to do this," Shaq said gently. "But I think you've waited long enough to hear your name spoken by the one who mattered most." The next day, Delaney stood outside the boarded-up library, an old brick building now abandoned, its glass panes dusted with age and memory. Shaq waited near the front, his arms folded, gaze steady. "She's inside," he said simply. Delaney stepped in, boots echoing against the marble floor. Light filtered through grime-coated windows, casting the room in shades of nostalgia. And there, sitting at one of the low wooden tables where children once gathered for story time, was Charlotte. She looked different, of course. Older, taller, her hair pulled into 2 neat braids, her eyes sharper than any 12-year-old's should be. But the moment she looked up, Delaney recognized her, and Charlotte smiled. "You came," the girl said softly. Delaney walked closer, heart pounding. "Of course I did." There was a silence, warm and full. Then Charlotte spoke again. "I remember your arms. They were shaking when you carried me." Delaney felt her eyes sting. "I was scared." "I wasn't," the girl said. "I knew you'd get me out." Delaney sat across from her. "They said I didn't." "I know. My mom. She was scared too. Not of you. Of the town. Of the reporters. They told her to stay quiet. Said it was better that way." She never spoke up. She tried. But people stopped listening before she could start, and I was too little then. Delaney nodded. "You're not little anymore." "No," Charlotte said. "And I'm tired of them telling the story wrong." Shaq remained by the door, silent, watchful. Delaney reached into her coat and pulled out the photo Mr. Harlan had given her months ago. The one of Charlotte standing outside the burned house, clutching her bear. "I've kept this," she said. "I didn't know if it would ever mean anything again." Charlotte looked at it. "That was the morning after. My mom told me not to smile for the camera. She said it would confuse people. Delaney felt a laugh bubble up. A tired, stunned thing. They were already confused. Charlotte looked her dead in the eye. I want to fix it. Delaney leaned back. How? I'll tell them what happened. I'll say it on video. Write it. Whatever they need. I remember you saved me. You got burned because of it. I want to say that, loud. Her words were simple. Firm. Like a promise forged in fire. Delaney pressed her palms to her face. Overcome. Then she reached forward, took Charlotte's hands, and held them tight. Thank you, she whispered. Charlotte squeezed back. I'm sorry it took so long. The interview happened 2 days later. Shaq arranged everything. Quiet. Professional. Dignified. A friend of his recorded it. Just Charlotte and her words. She spoke clearly. Eyes bright. Voice unwavering. She carried me out. I remember the smoke. The way my chest hurt. And her voice telling me to hold on. People said she caused it, but they were wrong. She's the reason I'm alive. The video was short. Barely 5 minutes. But it was powerful. Honest. And it lit a match under the town's silence. The diner was abuzz. Dale's hands shook when he watched it on his office computer. Marnie wept behind the soda machine. Andre gave Delaney a silent fist bump and said, Told you they'd come around. Jenna for once didn't show her face. Table 9 fell quieter than a funeral. The scar that once earned Delaney pity and mockery now drew reverence, respect, and eventually, apologies. But the most powerful moment came in the form of a letter. Typed, signed, from Charlotte's mother. I failed you. I let fear speak louder than truth. But not anymore. Thank you for saving my daughter. I'm sorry it took the world 3 years to catch up. Delaney read it twice, then again, then folded it into her journal, next to the first note Shaq ever gave her. That night, she sat by her window again. The sky darker but gentler now. The town still slept. But she felt different, lighter, fuller. The girl she had saved had finally saved her back. The truth doesn't knock. It breaks in. The truth didn't come through the front door. It didn't send a polite invitation or ring the bell. It broadcasted itself. 3 days after Charlotte and her mother sat down with Shaq in a quiet studio near the edge of town, the video dropped. A local podcast host known for edgy journalism and blunt storytelling released the interview with the blunt title, The Girl Who Was Saved, and the Town That Stayed Silent. It wasn't clickbait. It was a grenade. The recording opened with Charlotte's quiet but confident voice, describing smoke, fear, and the sound of Delaney's arms carrying her to safety. Then came her mother. Measured, apologetic, firm. We stayed silent to protect our name. But it was Delaney who protected our daughter. Shaq chimed in, his voice calm but stern, pressing on the town's silence like a bruise. There's dignity in survival. There's danger in rewriting history to protect comfort. It hit the local feeds by noon. By 3, it was on state news sites. By sunset, it had over 1 million views. And for the first time in years, Delaney Ray's name was being spoken with reverence. Not in hushed gossip, not in judgment, but in admiration. The diner became ground zero. It started with a trickle. A customer handed her a note with a prayer, written inside. Another brought a bouquet of wildflowers. Someone left a $50 bill under a napkin. At first, Delaney didn't know how to react. She smiled politely, said thank you, but her hands trembled every time she touched a table. Then came the news vans. One parked across the street. Another camped near the diner's back entrance. By the end of the week, there were 3 different reporters waiting to speak with her. But Delaney stayed inside, behind the counter, apron still tied, coffee still poured with practiced hands. The attention was surreal, overwhelming, but she grounded herself with routine. Dishes, orders, steps from booth to booth. Until the first hate mail arrived. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just a note. You ruined a family and made yourself a victim. Take your scar and go. She stared at it a long time before folding it up and placing it between the pages of her journal. Not out of reverence, but record. Marnie noticed her tension. They mad 'cause you ain't hiding no more. Delaney didn't respond. She didn't need to. The next day, another envelope. This one more direct. A printed photo of her outside the diner, circled in red ink. No words. Just the circle. Andre offered to walk her to her car. After work. You want me to call someone? Cops? No, she said. Not yet. Let them write. I've been invisible too long to disappear now. But not everyone was hiding behind anonymous threats. Reese Calloway came in. Mid-morning, alone. Wearing his leather jacket and an expression sharper than usual. He walked straight to the counter and sat down across from her. "You happy now?" he asked. Delaney set down the coffee pot. Excuse me? You dragged this whole town into a spectacle. You just couldn't let it go, huh?" She looked at him. Expression neutral. "I didn't say anything. They did. You let them film you. Let them lie for you." "No one lied." Reese leaned closer, voice low and cold. "You think this is over? I've got lawyers. My family's name means something. I'll sue for defamation, for disruption, for harassment." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you started a fire that burned reputations, not just houses." She exhaled. "Truth doesn't burn. It exposes." Reese's jaw tightened. "You made this about race." "No," she said, calm. "You made it about silence." He stood quickly, tossing a few crumpled bills on the counter. As he turned to leave, he added, "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. People forget fast." But people hadn't forgotten yet. That afternoon, a mother walked in with her son. She asked if Delaney was working, then thanked her not for saving a child, but for showing mine what courage looks like. Delaney couldn't speak. She just nodded, heart swollen with something too wide for words. Shaq called that night. "You holding up?" he asked. "I think so," she answered, staring at her scar in the bathroom mirror. "Storm always comes before the clearing," he said. "But you've got people now. You're not alone in the fire anymore." She smiled. "It still feels strange, because you're shifting. That's what truth does. It unroots and replants." Before hanging up, he added one more thing. "Next week we go national." Delaney's pulse spiked. "National? An interview? Bigger platform? They want to hear from you, not just those around you." She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Then we wait until you are," he said gently. "But just know your silence is no longer the only version of the story." At the diner, things continued shifting. Table 9 was quieter now, if they came in at all. Dale tried to act like nothing had changed. But even he started saying thank you when she clocked in. Marnie moved closer, sharing more stories, more laughter. Andre told her he was proud of her. Even Mr. Harlan, who had been silent lately, returned one morning. He sat in the usual booth and handed her a fresh note. This time it read, "You're not just surviving now, you're leading." She folded it slowly and placed it in her apron pocket. But it wasn't just support. Emails started flooding in. Some kind, some cruel. One from a journalist. One from a former teacher. One from a stranger who had survived something similar. All wanted her story. All wanted to know the girl behind the scar. Delaney sat in her apartment one night, surrounded by candles and the growing stack of letters. She flipped open her journal, stared at the blank page, and began to write, not just her account of the fire, but everything that came after. The diner, the silence, the shame, and now the voice. She didn't know what the next week would bring. If more threats would come, if Reese would really press charges, if the attention would grow or fade. But for the first time, it didn't matter, because the truth didn't knock. It had broken in, and it wasn't leaving. Some walls collapsed from the inside. It started with a press conference. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the edge of a podium in front of an old civic center, framed by banners for community justice and a small crowd of local reporters. The sky was bruised with overcast, but the mood beneath it was sharp, expectant. Delaney wasn't there. She watched from her apartment, heart in her throat, journal on her lap. The camera zoomed in on Shaq's face, firm, deliberate, but not angry, not theatrical, just clear. "I'm not here to point fingers," he began. "I'm here to lift a voice that's been drowned for too long. This isn't just about a scar, or a diner, or a rumor from 3 years ago. This is about the way small towns pretend fairness is real, when power still sits on one side of the table." He paused. The crowd leaned in. "I came to Maple's Diner because I heard a whisper. That whisper was a woman named Delaney Ray, a waitress, a hero, someone who saved a child and was left to rot in silence while others cashed in on fear." Delaney's breath caught. Shaq continued. "This town has allowed rumors to speak louder than evidence. The media erased her, the diner protected its profits, and certain individuals like Dale Matthews, the manager of that very diner, allowed harassment to fester unchecked." The reporters started scribbling. But this isn't just about calling people out, he said. It's about what we do now, what we choose to protect, comfort or justice. The clip spread fast. By evening, national outlets had picked it up. Headlines swirled. Shaq defends hero waitress in small-town scandal. Systemic silence in Maple County exposed. And the town reacted. By the next morning, there were picket signs outside the diner. Peaceful protesters, black, white, old, young, stood shoulder to shoulder with signs that read, "Believe Black women. Truth deserves volume. No more silence at Maples." Delaney didn't lead them. She watched from the back kitchen, heart pounding as Dale paced the dining room like a cornered animal. "They're ruining this place," he barked. "You happy now?" Delaney looked up from the silverware she was sorting. "It's not me they're angry at. They're chanting your name. They're chanting for truth." Dale scoffed. "This'll blow over. People always forget." But this time, they didn't. Because that afternoon, Mr. Harlan came forward. He didn't knock. He walked into the diner mid-shift, dressed in his usual coat and gloves, a man moving with gravity. Dale froze when he saw him. Delaney stopped mid-pour. Harlan looked around slowly, then addressed the entire room staff. Customers, protesters gathered outside, peeking through the windows. "I kept quiet long enough," he said. "I've got something to show you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside were documents, some yellowed with age, others newly printed. He placed them on the counter. "This is a record of complaints filed at Maples over the last 10 years, he said. "About discrimination, about racist remarks, all of them ignored or buried. I know, because I wrote half of them." He turned to Delaney, then back to Dale. "You remember the night of the fire, don't you?" Dale's face paled. "You weren't even there." "No," Harlan said, "but I talked to someone who was. I recorded our conversation. The night the fire happened, a man saw Delaney go in to rescue that girl. He called 911, he gave her name, and the dispatcher's transcript matches." Delaney stepped back, stunned.
"You buried that call, Dale,"
Harlan said. "Because you didn't want the diner associated with a black woman getting credit for saving a white child. And I have the tape." Gasps rippled through the room. Dale's mouth opened and closed. "You can't prove any of that's valid." "It doesn't need a court to make it true," Harlan said. "It just needs the light." Shaq, who had entered quietly behind him, stepped forward. "I'll make sure the light stays on." The protesters outside began clapping, then cheering. Inside, Dale turned to Delaney, rage simmering beneath his brittle calm. "You think this is justice?" He spat. "You think this is how change works? You burned this place down from the inside." Delaney's voice was quiet, but resolute. "I didn't light the match. You just never fixed the gas leak." He stormed into the back, slamming the door. Harlan turned to Delaney, his voice softer now. "You were never the problem. You were the mirror. They just didn't like what they saw." Over the next 2 days, the documents were verified. The recording Harlan provided, grainy but clear, was played on local radio. The voice of the eyewitness, a former delivery driver, described the fire, the girl and Delaney pulling her out. Dale's past complaints, buried HR logs, and internal memos surfaced. Turns out, the diner had a long history of quiet settlements. Several former employees came forward. One filed a lawsuit, and suddenly, the weight shifted. No one was defending Dale now. Shaq's platform turned the spotlight into heat. He hosted a live-stream discussion with Delaney and Harlan, titled "Not Just a Diner When Small-Town Power Hides Big Lies." Thousands watched. Delaney spoke sparingly, but with precision. "I didn't ask to be a symbol. I just didn't want to disappear." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just spoke. And the world finally listened. The diner, under mounting pressure, suspended Dale indefinitely. He made a public statement 2 days later. Something about misunderstanding, about fear, about the pace of change. No one cared, because the wall had already collapsed. Delaney, once the girl with the scar nobody wanted to acknowledge, was now being asked to lead town forums, speak at schools, join community panels. She declined most of them. Instead, she stayed where she'd always been, grounded, simple, steady. But one thing had changed. She was no longer alone. Late one night, after the protests had dwindled and the headlines quieted, Delaney stood outside the diner beneath a pink-orange sky, journal in hand. Mr. Harlan approached her, hands in pockets. "Funny how the truth doesn't come like thunder," she said. "It comes like a breath. Quiet. but enough to blow a house down. He smiled. Some houses need to fall before we can build something better. They stood in silence for a while, watching the streetlights flicker on. Then Delaney turned to him. You were right. I was waiting for the right eyes. And they found me. Some words carry more weight than fists. For all the noise the town had made in recent weeks. Protests, broadcasts, whispers in grocery store aisles. What came next arrived in a quiet more powerful than any chant. It happened on a Wednesday. The diner was half full. Delaney was folding silverware at the prep counter when the door opened, and someone stepped inside who hadn't been there in years. Not as a customer, not as a voice. Eleanor Calloway, wife of the town's wealthiest landowner, board chair for the local historical society, and mother to Reese Calloway, was the kind of woman who dressed like the world belonged to her, and everyone else had to be worthy of her gaze. She moved like a shadow in heels, graceful, calculated, emotionally bulletproof. And yet, that morning, something in her posture was different. Delaney glanced up, heart stuttering. Marnie dropped a spoon behind the counter. Even Dale, now back from his suspension but more restrained than before, poked his head out from the office and went still. Eleanor walked to the counter clutching a small leather purse. She looked at Delaney, direct, steady, and said, I'd like to speak with you. In private. For a moment, silence swept the room. Even the bell above the door seemed to freeze in anticipation. Delaney nodded slowly. Okay. She led Eleanor to the back hallway, near the supply shelves. No microphones. No press. Just them. Eleanor folded her hands. Her voice, when it came, wasn't lofty. It wasn't cold. It was tired. I should have come sooner, she began. But you need to hear it from me. The truth, not another version. Delaney waited. Eleanor looked away, then back again. The night of the fire, when the media started asking questions, it was me who contacted the local paper. I told them not to name you. Delaney's brow furrowed. You told them? I said a young woman had entered the property without permission. I left your name out, but I made sure they heard what they needed to twist it. She swallowed. I was afraid. Not of you. Of the town. Of what it would do to my family if people thought a black woman had been the hero while mine stood outside screaming. Delaney blinked, her throat tight. Reese was just a boy then, but already deep in the image we'd built for him. Eleanor continued. If you became the headline, he became the footnote. I wasn't protecting the truth. I was protecting an illusion. Delaney stepped back, arms crossed. And you let me carry it. For 3 years. Eleanor nodded, eyes shining. I did. And I watched you shrink under it. I told myself silence wasn't as bad as lying. But silence can be crueler. Delaney didn't speak for a long moment. Eleanor reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope. This is a letter. I've submitted it to the podcast team, the news stations, and the school board, publicly acknowledging what I did. I won't ask for forgiveness, Delaney, but I need you to know. I see it now. What I helped bury, who I helped break. Delaney took the envelope but didn't open it. Eleanor continued, more quietly. You saved a child. I tried to save a reputation. I can never balance that scale. They stood in silence until Eleanor finally said, I'll leave now. But if you ever want to ask me anything about that night or after, I'll answer. I owe you that. She turned, heels clicking softly against the tile. Delaney called out before she reached the door. Why now? Eleanor paused. Because my granddaughter asked me if heroes can have scars. And I realized she'd never heard your name. Then she left. The next day, the letter went public. It was read aloud on a morning broadcast, republished in 2 local newspapers, and posted online. I distorted the story to shield my own comfort. The truth is, Delaney Ray saved a child while I stayed silent. I have spent every day since trying not to see what I did, but I see her now, and I hope you do too. The apology was not viral. It didn't spark debate, but it settled something. The town, stunned once again, responded not with outrage, but reflection. People began asking questions not just about Delaney, but about their own silences. Old coworkers reached out. A retired teacher offered to write a recommendation for anything she ever needed. A few teens from the high school showed up to the diner with a handmade banner that read, Our hero, finally heard. Then came the call. Shaq, I've got something for you, he said. I don't need more money, she replied softly. It's not money. It's space. She blinked. What do you mean? A kitchen. Your own. Community-backed, rent-free for 3 years. Downtown. Brand new. Almost ready. Name it. Shape it. Feed who you want to feed. Her heart stopped. Shaq. I told them it came from anonymous funding. But I think you've earned the truth. It's from me. And a few folks who believe in you. She didn't know what to say. Her fingers gripped the phone like it might vanish. You fed the soul of this town for years, he added. Time to feed it your way. Delaney cried that night. Not out of grief. Not fear. But relief. A month later, the ribbon was cut. The kitchen was named Second Flame. A nod to survival. To rebirth. To the truth that fires don't always destroy. Sometimes they purify. At the opening ceremony, Mr. Harlan gave a small speech. Charlotte and her mother were there. Shaq stood beside Delaney. Proud but quiet. Like a big brother who didn't need the spotlight. Eleanor Calloway attended. Seated in the back. She didn't speak. But she listened. Reese did not show. That evening as the crowd thinned, Delaney stood alone in the kitchen. Looking around, the walls were lined with photos of community elders, local cooks, and stories of those who had fed others without applause. She added a new photo to the wall. It was of the old diner booth, the one where Shaq first sat. A quote painted beneath it. Truth doesn't knock, it breaks in. She stepped back and smiled. Some words, after all, didn't just heal. They rebuilt. Forgiveness doesn't erase scars, but it lets them mean something new. The grand opening of Second Flame came and went, but the warmth it ignited refused to fade. Nestled between an old barber shop and a second-hand bookstore on the corner of Main and Willow, Delaney Ray's new soul food diner stood like a promise kept. The windows glowed amber with soft lighting, the sign hand-painted with curled gold letters. Inside it smelled like cinnamon and thyme, fried chicken and Sunday mornings, memory and mercy. The booths were wide and inviting, the counters polished with care. Every table held a small card with a handwritten quote from a local poet, activist, or unsung elder. No two were alike. That was deliberate. Each quote, each name, was chosen to speak for someone who never got the chance. Delaney stood behind the counter now. Apron crisp, curls pinned neatly under a scarf that had once belonged to her mother. She moved with quiet command, watching, checking, greeting guests as they entered with curious eyes and expectant hearts. The menu was simple but rich. Cornbread with smoked honey butter, gumbo thick with history, greens steeped in garlic and slow love, pies that tasted like they were baked with stories instead of sugar. There was no dress code, no reservation list, no expectation other than respect. And people came. Not just locals, but travelers who had seen her story online. Families who drove from hours away because they wanted to taste food that had been born in fire and seasoned with resilience. She greeted them all with the same grace. No longer invisible. Not an idea. A person. A woman. Alive, present, and seen. Shaq visited quietly. No press. No entourage. Just a giant among mortals. Slipping into the corner booth, like he belonged to the walls. He never asked for a discount. Always tipped heavy. And each time he left her a single note on the napkin. Keep burning. The world needs your light. It became a ritual between them. One Tuesday afternoon, as the lunch crowd thinned, he asked her, "Does it feel real yet?" Delaney leaned on the counter, gaze soft. "Not always. Sometimes I still wake up waiting for it to fall apart." Shaq nodded. "That's what happens when you've had to carry the weight alone for too long. Even relief feels suspicious." "But this?" she said, gesturing to the kitchen humming behind her, the laughter rising from the booths. "This feels earned." "It is earned." She looked at him. "You never told me why you came that first day." He smiled. "Because I heard a whisper, and it sounded like something the world wasn't ready to forget." She never asked again. Mr. Harlan visited weekly. Always the same booth. Always the same black coffee. He'd nod at Delaney, pass her a new clipping for the wall, or a folded note with something poetic scrawled in his elegant hand. One week he brought her a small framed photo. It was a picture of her from the opening day, laughing beside Charlotte, apron smudged, sun caught in her curls. He'd printed a caption beneath it. "The fire tried to erase me. Instead, it made me unforgettable." She stared at it a long time before hanging it on the main wall, just above the quote board where stories rotated weekly. Guests stood and stared at it. Some took photos. Some cried. Others simply nodded, as if it confirmed something they'd always hoped was true. Reese Calloway never returned. His family sold 2 properties downtown. The Calloway name still hung above the lumberyard, but the community no longer whispered with reverence. It whispered with hindsight. His mother Eleanor sent one final letter. In it she thanked Delaney for allowing silence to be broken without vengeance. She asked if she could volunteer at Second Flame's monthly community supper. Delaney wrote back, "Yes, but no press, no credit, just people." And Eleanor came. She wore an apron, served sweet tea, and cleared tables. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't look like a handshake. It looks like shared labor. The real magic, though, came at night. When the lights dimmed, when the last guests left, when the staff closed up, wiped down, laughed in the kitchen, Delaney would sit in that corner booth, the one that used to be the edge of her story, and she'd write in her journal, still bound with old receipts and new memories. She chronicled the things people told her over meals, stories of grief, of starting over, of finding hope in unexpected places. She didn't write to publish them. She wrote to preserve them. One entry read, "A woman came in today who lost her husband in a house fire. She said the cornbread tasted like closure. I cried after she left, not because it hurt, but because it healed."
Another read.
"A white man sat at table 7 and apologized for laughing at me once, years ago. He didn't ask for absolution. He just wanted to say it to my face. I let him. There were no miracles here, no magical endings, just honesty, just effort, just scars that no longer needed to be hidden." On the 6-month anniversary of Second Flame's opening, Delaney hosted a special dinner. She invited everyone, past customers, community elders, protesters, quiet allies, even the mayor came. Before the meal, she stood behind the microphone and took a deep breath. "This place isn't about a fire," she began. "It's about what survived it." She scanned the room. Faces that had once looked away now met her gaze with quiet reverence. "I used to think forgiveness meant erasing what happened. But now I know it means carrying the memory differently. Not with shame, but with strength." Applause rose, soft and sustained. She continued, "Every scar I carry, visible or not, has taught me something. The last one, the one I couldn't name, until now, is trust. Trusting that I don't have to live small to survive." Shaq, seated in the back, nodded once. "And to every girl out there," Delaney added, "who's been told to stay quiet, to stay down, just know, silence isn't your story's end. Sometimes, it's just the place you catch your breath." When she finished, she walked over to the wall beside the kitchen door. She held the framed quote in her hands, the one Mr. Harlan had gifted her. She hung it carefully, right above the register, where every guest could see it as they left. It read, "The fire tried to erase me. Instead, it made me unforgettable." And for the first time in her life, she believed it fully. If this story moved you, if Delaney's journey from silence to strength left a mark, don't let it end here. Tap that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real stories that speak truth, healing, and justice. Your voice helps amplify stories like Delaney's. Be part of that change.